So I love watching you perform on YouTube from your YouTube videos because I think you have such a beautiful musical intuition just
Thanks.
naturally for the music you perform. I'm curious, was this intuition innate? Like, do you think you've always just kind of had it naturally, or is it something you think it developed more with your studies and growing as a person?
I think I think that the intuition. Well, thank you first of all. I'm trying to think about how I developed my passion for music.
Yeah.
It definitely was not something that I would say came naturally.
Hmm.
I've learned to be passionate about music.
Sure.
I think when I was very young, it was very obvious. So I
Hmm.
think you got to start with some sort of passion
Yeah,
at a
yeah,
young age.
yeah.
I would say it plateaued
Mhm.
around. It came in waves. So it plateaued in my childhood, and then
Okay.
it came back when I started at Curtis,
Mhm.
and it built up. It plateaued again during COVID, actually.
Okay.
I would say it just kind of plateaued.
Sure.
Um, but I think that's normal. Um, I think the intuition of performing
Mhm.
has always been very natural to me. I do love the idea of sharing something with
Sure.
people, whether that be talking
Mhm.
about something,
Yeah, yeah,
whether that be performing
yeah,
or serving food
yeah,
or
yeah,
having someone over. I
yeah,
like the idea of hosting.
yeah,
So for me, I find great joy in having people have a great
yeah,
experience of the presence.
yeah.
Um, but I would say I learn a lot from watching other people play.
Mm.
Um, and I know this can be controversial, but I think there is value to the saying "steal like an artist,"
Yeah,
because that's the beautiful thing about art. You can't really copyright someone else's way of playing.
sure.
No matter how much you try to imitate it, you
Yeah,
cannot exactly imitate
yeah,
it. Same thing with acting, I
yeah.
think. So there are a couple of people that I just really look up to, and I
Yeah.
would study. I remember before I went to Curtis,
Uh-huh.
my teacher situation in my hometown was a little bit dicey because I
Mhm.
didn't really have one full time teacher.
Sure.
But that was the time when YouTube came out, 2006,
Yeah,
2007,
yeah,
and I remember suddenly all these incredible videos were coming
yeah,
out.
yeah,
Pinkus Zuckerman,
yeah,
Itzhak Perlman, Heifetz, all
yeah.
of these people that you only could hear on video,
Right,
on CD,
right.
where suddenly you could see how they played,
Yeah,
right? So I would rip it off the internet, slow it
yeah,
down,
yeah,
and just literally rewind and
yeah,
rewind and rewind and
yeah.
rewind. And I'm like, why does that person? Oh, when they do upper staccato, do that? How come their
Mm.
vibrato is so loose?
Right.
So there's a sense of self research that I think
Mm.
that's very necessary
Yeah,
in order to learn for a passion. Because I think once you can clearly find a technique for it, then you can start explaining that as
yeah.
well. And that's also when the passion starts, because you start realizing I'm really good at this,
Right,
or at
right.
least I have enough resistance that I'm willing to go through the pain and suffering of trying to learn
Right.
and actually finding a solution and explaining it.
Yeah,
So that's with everything. I mean, with music playing, that's the thing about it. It's so
mm.
multifaceted. It's
Yeah,
not just about playing the piece. It's like,
right.
how do you perform on stage? How do
Yeah,
you break down your mentality and
yeah,
prepare for a concert? How do
right,
you learn a piece? How do you teach someone? How
right.
do you think about a new program?
Yeah,
And it's so multifaceted that I
yeah,
think that's how I developed the passion
yeah.
for it.
Well, and that's really interesting because you talked about like kind of stealing,
Yeah, yeah,
ideas.
yeah.
And, it's interesting because I think regardless of how much you try to imitate someone
Uh-huh.
else, one's performance is like their own fingerprint, right?
Yep.
It's like whatever you offer, regardless of how much you're trying to imitate someone else, it's just unique to you because you're bringing not just your music, but your whole life experience and
Yep.
everything that you have to offer as a person to you on stage. So again, you can't 100% copy any one person, no matter how much you would like to. And yeah, no, I think we talked before. It's
Hmm.
like we kind of grew up at like a very sweet spot in
Yeah.
middle school, where that's when YouTube, like you were mentioning, like
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
it was becoming big. And I remember like you just there were certain recordings that I just always gravitated towards
Yep.
on YouTube early on, and you know, going back to you, there's one video. It was the Tchaikovsky from the final round of Queen Elizabeth. I was watching that in its entirety
Oh
while I
my
was at the
gosh.
gym a couple days ago, and I was like, wow, like there were so many things that you did in that piece that I mean, I've heard that piece, you've heard that piece like 100,000
Yeah, yeah.
times, but there were things that you did that were so fresh and so nuanced, and it was new, but it made sense in its own unique way. So I'm just that's why I wanted to ask this question is because
Uh,
you're such a interesting, unique musician in so many ways.
oh, thank you. Thank you. I think I have a very keen eye for um, what I like. I don't know if I don't like something sometimes, but I know what I like.
Yeah.
So when I hear another artist do something that's really cool,
Yeah.
I will steal it.
Yeah.
I will steal it.
Yeah.
Sometimes what I worked on with my previous teachers was like, sometimes you gotta like filter the things that you don't like as well,
Yeah.
because you only do things that you like, and suddenly you skip over details.
Yeah.
But I'm very quick to have like, that was really cool,
Yeah.
and I steal that,
Yeah.
whether that's from anything from a certain fingering to a certain sound color, or to even the way they move on stage.
Yeah.
Or whether that's how they walk on stage,
Right.
like really small little details.
Right.
And maybe that comes from the artistic way of things. It's the same thing with even like certain rooms. For example, if there's a nice room that I like, I really like that shelf.
Yeah.
I'm just very fast to see those things.
Right.
So with Tchaikovsky's Violin Concerto, it's very interesting because it was one of the first pieces where I learned more or less on my own, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah. Of course, I learned it during school.
Yeah.
So I learned it first with Pinkas Zukerman when I
Sure.
was 17.
Yeah.
It was one of the first concertos I ever learned with him. And it didn't really go anywhere. I mean, it was fantastic. Of course, he's really great with technique.
Yeah.
And I think we only did the first page.
Okay.
I left it. When I was 21, it was near the end of my time at Curtis. And I was asked to play Tchaikovsky Concerto. I was like, I'm just gonna learn it during the summertime, and I learned it.
Yeah.
So at that time, it was one of the first projects where I'm gonna learn it its entirety and not show it to any teacher until I'm ready to play it.
Sure. Yeah.
So in that way, I think that's also why I was looking at everything from a first-hand experience.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and we talked before about this a little bit, and I'm curious to delve into it a little bit more because we had this conversation about, should we keep pure to the score or should we have our own fresh take? And I'm curious as to like where you kind of stand, because I mean, I don't think it shouldn't be like one spectrum or the other, right? It shouldn't just be like you're one or the other. Maybe you want to kind of compromise on both, but
yeah, I think it depends on the repertoire. First of all, if it's a Badini, L'Arrond de Lutin, or Dance of the Goblins, I think you go ham at it. If you want to play it 5 times as fast as usual, you want to play it slower. If you're going for a certain vibe, I think it's pretty legitimate because it is a showpiece.
Yeah.
If you're going for something like Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, something that is, even the composers themselves are very intentional in the way they wrote stuff.
Yeah.
I think that there's definitely room for freedom to interpret those markings. But I do think that, especially for the audience of who you're sharing this with, it depends. Of course, if you want to just play as it is and do whatever, I mean, you can always do whatever you want. But for me, I think I like to have meaning behind everything. So whether that be the most weird interpretation, if there's a sense of I look at the score in this way and you can explain it, at the end of the day, I think does the whole thing work? I think someone's got to be there to say that to you. So I've heard some pretty weird interpretations of all those things I just mentioned, the Bach sonatas and all that. Some people play extremely romantic. Some people play extremely Baroque. Some people play in between. I think they're all legitimate. The nice thing about like some of the big pieces, Bach solo sonatas, let's just take that for example. It's such great music to begin with. The harmony speaks so much by itself already. So I think as long as you are able to somehow express the music through the harmonies, especially in those pieces, I'm pretty open-minded, at least right now. I'm pretty open-minded to see what how that can be interpreted. And I think there is merit to that because every generation and every time frame it does reflect in the way that we interpret music, just like language, right? So even though, let's say English, for example, English from 1,000 years ago was very different, but there's a reason for change, and we still revisit the past in order to understand the future.
Exactly.
So as long as we're having that kind of mindset, I'm pretty okay with almost anything.
Well, and I think that's really, I'm glad you brought up Bach because him specifically, at least with the cello suites, and I think in the manuscripts for the violin sonatas and partitas too, there's almost no dynamic markings. There's no tempo markings, and Bach obviously lived during a time where improvisation was a big thing, right? So I believe he wanted his performers, like performers that were playing his music, to have the freedom to listen and react to the harmonies that he was creating.
Mm-hmm.
And as long as there was conviction and as long as it made sense, I don't think he really cared necessarily what one thing you did. It was more about just reacting to the harmonies, like you said.
I think so.
Yeah,
and that starts to really become even clearer when you start working with living day composers.
Yes.
Because my experience with working with most living day composers is, they all have a spectrum as well of how much they really want things to be on the score. But many composers are like, you know what, that doesn't sound good at all, even though I was so specific with it. So let's just cut it out, right? And I think if you look back at Bach's time or Beethoven's time, the players had a very different set of techniques. It's a different instrument. I mean, this is an instrument from the 1700s, but it's distorted to the way that's in the 21st century now. So even the sheer instrument itself, I think, has changed, and therefore the sheer root of playing a piece has to be interpreted a little bit differently as well. And how do we know what things sounded like? Are we trying to recreate what's been done, or are we trying to kind of put our own imprint? So of course, that's the beauty of art, because you can get into a day's worth of discussion about which one's right, and you'll still not have a consensus at the end.
And I think with music, it's like, that's the beauty of it, is there's almost no right or wrong.
Exactly.
Right? So unless you're playing wrong notes or
even then sometimes, right?
Yeah, that's fair. There's a case for that.